10 Years of the Cachekeepers. The Cachekeepers are a mum and her two daughters. It all started way back in 2011, when the oldest daughter decided that wandering around the Highlands of Scotland wasn't enough for her. She wanted a different reason to get out of bed every morning and to set foot in the dreich streets of Inverness. And that's when she found geocaching. Although her mum lived miles away in North Yorkshire, she was soon pulled into the thrill of the hunt too, as was the other, younger daughter, who lived in Carmarthen, in Wales. Anyone would think that they couldn't stand one another, but that had just been how the chips had landed. The oldest daughter decided to call herself Tent Bruiser, because she spent most of her life camping out in the wilds, and because she was never the most delicate of flowers. Their mum decided upon Kangoo Camp. She too loved camping, but hers was done from a Rango kangoo that she'd converted to be able to sleep in. The youngest daughter's caching name became Pink People. Why? No idea. There are some things in life that are unfathomable, and I believe that's one of them. It certainly wasn't because she loved pink and had visions of living the life of a Barbie girl. Sometimes it's just better not to worry about the little details. Instead, let's move on to the next part of the story. Tent Bruiser, the older one, moved down to Wales to be with Pink People and her family. That left Kangoo Camp, Mum, still in Yorkshire. They all carried on caching, with the two sisters vying for who could find the most caches. Whereas, up in Yorkshire, Kangoo Camp decided that setting caches was more to her liking. The first cache the trio placed was Little Miss Trouble by Pink People in September 2011. Little Miss Trouble being the caching name of Pink People's daughter, and the cache was placed for her. This photo shows Tent Bruiser and Little Miss Trouble returning from one of their earliest maintenance visits. The cache remains live as of November 2025, when we celebrate reaching 10 years of the Cachekeepers. Roughly a fortnight later, Kangoo Camp started her unrelenting cache placement up in Yorkshire. It began with two caches, Southtown Lane and what later became part of the Toadstool Trail series, a simple box called Number 2 Toadstool Trail Box. Tent Bruiser was rather late to the placement party and hid her one and only solo hide in January of 2013. A full 16 months after the other two had created theirs. And this cache was the Mumbling Micro, a cache with a twist, hidden in the heart of Mumbles, Swansea. This cache gave a glimpse of what was to come from the trio. It also helps to show the differences in their characters. Tent Bruiser was nearly always hesitant to create anything, but when she did everything she could to make it as good as possible. Pink People loved hiding good caches, but her focus was always on where it was placed, rather than what was placed. To her, the walk was the most important part. And Kangoo Camp was in the middle, a balance to their two opposing ways of looking at things. As you can see, up until now, they all worked separately, placing their own individual caches, but helping out one another when they could. Up in Yorkshire, Kangoo Camp enlarged the Toadstool Trail series until it had 7 caches, including that initial box. You'd walk around finding the box. There was a fake toadstool. Pass a little pond, and there was a magnetic key safe up a tree. A letterbox cache. My favourite was Wilf, a gnome who sat underneath a footbridge, fishing. The final being a large box with toadstools growing out of the top of it. And our caching style was slowly developing, and we were growing into our roles. Tent Bruiser, if you haven't guessed already, that's me, drew a sketch to show cachers that walking straight along the main path, as opposed to around the series, would lead to a whole world of trouble that involved mud. Lots of mud. They still did it though, and mentioned in their logs that they'd fallen foul of the boggiest patch of ground that they'd ever encountered. That's when we first started to learn that we needed to try to second-guess cachers to ensure that they had the best experience possible. The Toadstool Trail was also when we realised that cachers enjoy a touch of whimsy, as well as a good walk and dry container. Other caches that Kangoo Camp placed around that time included A Seat in the Country, Ellaby Bank, with a red herring thrown in for good luck, Discoloration, Greenhow Clump Reservoir, and the original Flower Box. Many of her initial hides were copied from ideas we'd seen elsewhere in the country, but often with an extra little twist. Incy Wincy was an idea we'd first seen used by PK Bathrooms in Carmarthenshire. Would you believe it? A cache that asked you to write a whole lot of lies in your log was taken from one in Porthcawl. Lollipop Lane was a multi that arose because I had decided that I was going to start making camo bags because it was far cheaper to make them than to buy them. I took a lot of my ideas, such as cutting the strip of Velcro at the top in half to make it not only cheaper still, but also easier to open, from the queen of UK camo bag sewing, Molly Jack. There have been many more camo bags sewn over the years, too innumerable to count, but none were quite as complicated as the Lollipop Lane bags. Down in Swansea, Pink People had a grand idea, to place one cache for every letter of the alphabet. Before I show you those, though, it's probably a good idea to mention that she wasn't alone. I've already mentioned her daughter, Little Miss Trouble, but she was also aided and abetted by her husband, Barnacle Boy, and her son, Pigwig. Together, they made and placed the alphabet series, the idea being that you tried to guess what the letter stood for before arriving at ground zero. Here are A, C, D, F, G, I, O, P, S, T, U, V, W, Y, and Z. One other large project that we took on around this time, in 2013, was arachnophobia, a resurrected night cache with reflectors that spanned 1.5 miles around an old beech woodland and returned you close to where you started in a lair full of creepy crawlies and spiders' webs. For the next few years, Pink People, Barnacle Boy, Little Miss Trouble, Pigwig and I could periodically be found in the dead of night carting random ladders around the woods in the vain hope of ensuring that all of the reflectors could be spotted easily and weren't obscured by mud or an annoying leafy growth. It was sadly a lot of work for the amount of visitors it got. That's often the way though. The best caches tend to need the most maintenance, because they're the ones with the most parts that can go wrong. Back to Kangoo Camp up in Yorkshire. She'd decided that it was time to hold her first event. Actually, it was probably me who decided that it was time for her to hold her first event. I am just a little bit bossy. I like to think that I'm enthusiastic and encourage everyone with my enthusiasm, to the point where they decide that it would be an absolutely fantastic idea to hold something that they didn't really want to. Mum would probably just say that she was railroaded into it. Nevertheless, the pub in the country event went swimmingly. Everyone seemed to enjoy themselves, and the Roxby round caches that were placed to coincide with the event. This was the first appearance of the Rubber Tree cache. Hutland seemed to be a hit. People loved finding the North York Boundary Post cache. But V is for became a right pain because it kept going missing, and I became increasingly fed up of making vampire bats out of polymer clay. Although this was well before the start of The Cachekeepers, we'd already found our niches. I tended to create items out of polymer clay. I was also the one who created anything digital. The cache pages, images, logbooks. That was my job, and one I could do easily from Swansea for Kangoo Camp in Yorkshire. I also fielded any questions via the message centre. Oh, and of course, the camo bags. Kangoo Camp did the more practical side of the designing. If wood needed to be whacked together, if items needed to be glued, she did those jobs. She was also in charge of the spray paint and varnishing. And Pink People and her little family? They were our legs. They were the people who lugged cones around the countryside and barrels up hills. They were the ladder people. We will do maintenance on the caches that aren't the easiest to get to people. In 2013, Kangoo Camp placed the Buccaneer series along a disused railway line. This was a pirate-themed series and contained the Tavern cache, a diorama inspired by the Pickle Hotel in Pembrokeshire by the highly talented Mushroom Mike. Dioramas continue to be one of her passions to make. She's made quite a few, including Tenby Harbour Bison, Quiet Time for the Queen, and most recently, Q for the Chippy. But this is still a couple of years until the Cachekeepers make their first appearance. In those years, we hosted another event up in Yorkshire, one where we tried to ensure that everyone went home with bags of swag. And if you know anything about the Cachekeepers, you'll know that we love our swag. We love the thought that somebody is able to open one of our caches and rootle through a swathe of multicoloured swag. Perhaps find some buttons for a craft project, earplugs for noise abatement purposes, a necklace perhaps, or basically see pretty colours rather than a mess of wet, mouldy rubbish. This event was one we held in conjunction with a great caching friend. We're all mad round here. She was mad. She was also one of the main users of the Hinderwell Pixies TB tunnel. Well, she didn't use it personally, but she'd often drop trackables near one end of the tunnel at Bolby Mine in Yorkshire so that they could travel along the tunnel to the other end in Mumbles, Wales, and all in the safe hands of the Hinderwell Pixies. They were a clan of pixies who strangely enough resembled tiny dwarfs, who allowed us to use their tunnel to transport trackables back and forth. Over the years they transported many trackables and took a considerable amount of photos of each one that travelled from Yorkshire to Wales or the other way round. Wasn't it lucky for us to find a tribe of pixies that had tunnel entrances in exactly the same locations as where we happened to live? Other than pixies, gnomes made several appearances in both Yorkshire and Wales. Gnomes seem to be quite divisive as caches. Some people love them. Others are somewhat less enthusiastic. There was a bird box containing a chicken. That cache was called Edwina. Edwina was well liked. So well liked that she was nabbed a couple of times, despite having "not swag" sharpied on her bottom. Edwina made quite a racket when you opened the bird box. Returning her was not easy. Anything that surprised people seemed to go down well, such as the later ones like Zebedee that physically jump out at you due to a coiled spring, or caches with a tale to be read, like the supposed demonic powers at a strange demonic area cache right outside Asda, where the logbook happened to keep mysteriously changing into a CD, no matter how hard we tried. Also in that 2014-ish era popped up one of my best ideas, or one of my worst. Try large cache spotting, a simple mystery cache that took you to a removable greenhouse in my back garden. Well, it was initially a removable greenhouse until the wind removed it. Then it turned into a tent, but that was rather a lot of fun, because I purposefully placed the log as far away from the opening as possible, so people had to crawl into the tent to sign it. Unfortunately, I had to move, and Try Large Cache Spotting was downgraded to Try Micro Cache Spotting, a similar puzzle to solve, but now only a micro underneath a windowsill. As a trio, we're not really ones for puzzle caches. We enjoy solving and finding them, but our brains don't really get excited in creating them. We preferred field puzzles. One mystery cache we did place was at the behest of the Yorkshire Mega Team in 2018. To coincide with the year Yorkshire held the UK annual Mega, they wanted a series of 26 alphabet-based caches spread around the county, each containing a bonus number that led ultimately to a bonus cache near the location of the Yorkshire Mega. With me so far? We were given W for Whitby, and we added as much purple to the cache as possible, because that was the colour of the Yorkshire Mega Team. But there was one problem. Whitby had a maggot. A cacher who could access premium member-only caches, like our modern Whitby cache, and would remove them. Just throw them away. After placing a couple of caches, like Whitby Beach, we realised that he or she was a very lazy maggot and couldn't be bothered solving puzzles or walking through multi-stage multis. And hence the simplest puzzle that we could think up at the time was born. I think that brings us to the first ever event the Cachekeepers attended. Have a look at some more photos of random caches whilst I tell you the story. For some reason, Pink People and I decided that we wanted to attend the monthly Grumpy Cachers event in Pontardawe, a few miles away from where we lived in Swansea. I say some reason because it was very unusual for us to spend any time together, and to purposefully spend an hour on a bus together was quite unheard of. We love one another dearly, you see, but we just, we just don't get on. We rub each other up the wrong way. If Pink People likes doing things one way, I tend to do things the other. Kangoo Camp truly is the glue that blinds. She doesn't blind us, that binds us together. It's a shame, because I think my sister is an awesome person, and I'm pretty certain that the feeling is mutual. But put us in a room together, and there are all too often fireworks. And so, why were we on this bus together? Who knows? But we were, and we attended our first ever Grumpy Cachers meeting. It was pleasant. We had a good time. And then we returned home on the bus. And it was there, on the bus, that we decided, wouldn't it be fun if we joined our skills with Mum and had a geosetting group? No, Mum didn't really have a say in the matter. We knew she'd agree. Well, we hoped she'd agree. But to be honest, it was one of the most bonkers ideas that we'd ever had. Did I mention that my sister and I seldom agree on things? And yet, here we are, 10 years later. We haven't quite caused World War III, but life hasn't all been sunshine and roses either. Luckily, we always have Mum to smooth things over. Did I mention how awesome Mum is? Actually, no. My little sister is awesome. My mum is awesomer. And we now arrive at the middle era of our cache setting, the early Cachekeepers period, when Mum was still in Yorkshire and Pink People and I were plodding on by ourselves in Swansea. Along came Grandpa Googly, the Christmas box, Dunno, Bungie, and the Yellow Men series up in Yorkshire. You might notice parallels with Grandpa Googly that was placed in December 2023 on Kilvey Hill, Swansea. Not Dunno in August 2023. The Christmas box on the Gower. Bungie and the Yellow Series caches that slowly made their way into the local landscape in 2023. We kept placing random caches. In 2017, we placed both Twiggy and Twiggle. One was sadly archived in 2020 with 40 favourite points. The other is still alive and well, despite various new eyes, a new body, and several new perches. He has 115 favourite points. I think one reason he does so well is because he hides only a few feet away from one of the busiest paths in Swansea. That was Pink People's doing. Finding great locations is something she excels in. But although we enjoy placing one-offs, it's great to get your teeth into placing an entire series. The first one that Pink People placed after the Alphabet series was the Kilvey Hill Pirates, a series of pirate-themed caches on Kilvey Hill overlooking the city of Swansea. There were loads of caches, all of various designs. Sadly, I don't have many photos because Pink People made the caches and I don't seem to have any record of them. So, swiftly moving on. I bought a laser printer so that we could use Write in the Rain paper. And because I had the paper, I decided that I'd design a variety of logs for our caches. There have been yellow ones for the Yellow series, pirate-themed ones, blue ones for Pembrokeshire, general green ones with our caching logo on the top. The caching logo is supposed to represent all of us. Pink People got a ring of pink. The green is Kangoo Camp. The purple, Tent Bruiser. And the feet, because we all love walking. Plus, who doesn't love walking barefoot on grass? As time goes on, I hope you can see that we're slowly upping our game. That was certainly our intention, trying to iron out any mistakes that had been made with previous caches, ensuring that caches stayed watertight, that vital parts weren't stolen by tying them firmly in place, stopping folk from tearing signposts apart in order to find the cache that was actually squeezed into a hole in the stile, that sort of thing. As I mentioned before, Kangoo Camp was creating magic with spray paint and sealing dozens of caches with varnish. Sometimes she'd just take it easy and make a cache like Llama Llama with Little Miss Trouble by slapping stickers liberally on a box. And all the while, Pink People and Barnacle Boy were toiling away, ensuring that each and every cache was well maintained, contained swag if it was large enough, and had a fresh log sheet, no matter if it was a mile from the nearest road or far closer to home. In Yorkshire, we found a delightfully narrow, windy, minor road that the locals hated driving along. That got a series of 6 caches that were rock-themed. Gateway, Flamboyant Rock, Stick, The Real Fake, Cairn, Blood from a Stone, with a bonus box that contained painted rocks. I think it looked good, but I decided after that I didn't ever want to paint rocks again. We found another small lane. We named that Frustration Lane. The caches along there were all field puzzles, and if you managed to complete them all in one day, your name was added to the Roll of Honour. If I can find any photos of any of the caches, I'll pop them on here, but sadly there are very few records of some of them. One contained dozens of keys. Find the correct key to open the padlock to get to the inside container. A water tube puzzle. Pour water in, up pops the cache. As long as you've managed to plug all of the holes. This has gone on a long time, hasn't it? I've been talking for ages, and we haven't even got into what I'd call the modern Cachekeepers era. You see, that's when Kangoo Camp finally made the plunge and moved back down to Wales to live close to us in 2020. By that stage, we'd been placing caches as the Cachekeepers for 5 years, and during that time life had changed considerably. We'd aged, and I in particular had suffered from a few major health setbacks, including not being able to walk very far at all. That meant that the days of strapping a rucksack to my back and walking out of the front door with the intention of camping in the hills had long disappeared, and the name Tent Bruiser just made me sad. And Mum, well, she'd changed cars, as you do. So Kangoo Camp was no longer relevant either. That's when we changed to Miss Bossy Boots and the head honcho of the Cachekeepers, because quite frankly I'm always going to be the bossy one, and Mum is always going to be the head honcho. She's the one who makes the final decisions. And Pink People? That is as apt as it ever was. Barnacle Boy is still Barnacle Boy. Little Miss Trouble isn't quite as little as she once was, but she still has that little gleam of naughtiness in her eye, especially when she gets to go caching. Pigwig has changed considerably, but he still seems to like his moniker. Good on him. He'll always be Pigwig to me. In the first few years of Kangoo Camp / the head honcho moving to Swansea, we were finding our feet. I don't drive, so having her ferry me around to find new locations was great. Some caches we published weren't on the best roads. The series along the Wainarlwydd Road wasn't great, for instance. That road is incredibly busy and can feel like a racetrack at times. But the Lower Lliw Reservoir was a nice find that created a pleasant loop. I've only ever been to Quiet Time for the Queen and Box. Pink People being the one who regularly continues the round and maintains Rubber Tree, Ground Dweller, Tree Dweller, and Saito. Whereas the head honcho prefers to wait in the car park and talk to Mr. B-Plug. We put a lot of time and effort into making each cache unique. We have put out plain nanos, but they have to be special in some way. Even this plain rock took hours to make. First, for the head honcho to 3D print. Yes, she bought a 3D printer for caching. Then I painted and sanded it several times. And finally it returned to her for a spray coat of varnish. But at this point, we didn't have enough energy left to create unique caches. We were worn out and worn down. We needed something easy. And so the filler fellas were born. Glue some googly eyes onto something, call it a name, and voila, you have a quirky cache that can be placed for the locals to enjoy. For a limited time only. I present to you Barty, Kevin, Usain, Craig, Jodie, Sierra, Brian, and Victor. Right, we're nearly there now, at the present day. I think I have a couple of categories left. No, it's 3. We'd better keep on then. In 2024, the Cachekeepers were finally awarded virtual. It was the 4th set of virtual handouts, and we were determined to do something good with it. And so the debate began. Where should we place it? It needed to be somewhere that you couldn't place a normal cache, because otherwise, why use up your virtual? We all agreed that it should be somewhere that was special to us. But we also agreed that we wanted to be strategic. You see, during the entire time of the Cachekeepers, we'd been chasing favourite points. Lots of caches aim towards different stats. There are simple stats like finding as many caches as possible to filling in your Jasma challenge grid 10 times over. We love watching the favourite point tally rise. Just before the head honcho left Yorkshire, we'd become number 25 in the UK for favourite points. That was our peak. We are lower now, but we are still slowly gaining favourite points. Our current total, as of the 1st of November 2025, is 5,777. But we're greedy. We want more. So the virtual had to be somewhere with a high footfall. Somewhere pretty. Pink people suggested Cardiff Bay. I suggested Pentrhaven Burial Chamber. The head honcho suggested St Catherine's Island, Tenby. We chose that. She's invariably right. And if you ever want to make a study of the type of pens that geocachers use, we've got you covered. The thing is, this would have been great if that's where we'd stopped. But I'm afraid that once again I got excited and decided that if we had something as grand as a virtual, could we have a little unveiling? An event, perhaps, at Ground Zero to mark the occasion. There was one problem with that, though. I couldn't get to Ground Zero due to mobility problems. OK then. We could perhaps hire a hall. I'd be able to get there. But if we hired a hall, that would be a waste of money if we didn't perhaps place a few caches around it. And The one thing that's really special about a virtual is that there aren't a lot of them around, and newly published ones don't occur that often. And one thing led to another. The simple virtual with a simple event turned into a day of grab as many different cache types as you can. We placed the event, the virtual, a Saito with absolutely no litter, a letterbox hybrid cache, a multi, an unknown, threw in some traditionals, and a random church micro. I spent hours on the internet working out how to create Where I Goes. At one, the cartridge failed and left folk at ground zero scratching their heads. And then there was the Earth cache. I am never creating an Earth cache again. It was torture. Including the 10 Years of Geocaching event, we will have hosted 9 events and 7 Saitos. After the first Saito and Lidstep Headland, I think we did much better and actually found locations with lots of rubbish. It's strange to think that we counted as a win to be able to send caches loose in an area where the ground is littered with crisp packets, monster cans and dead bathtubs. Normally you'd avoid anything like that as much as possible. But there you go. Caches are an odd set of folk. You wouldn't think anyone would be happy to have their birthday party celebrated in a windswept car park in December. But he seemed happy enough. Perhaps I should have asked, though. Whilst I'm mentioning events, I can't not mention the Croeso events at Porthcawl. Ever since I moved to Swansea back in 2012, one of the largest events in the South Wales calendar was the annual Croeso event at the high tide in Porthcawl, held to welcome in each new year and run by Molly Jack. Unfortunately, due to ill health, she could no longer continue. I was so proud when she asked us to continue the tradition. And so we held our first Croeso event in January 2024. Croeso I 2024. Welcome to 2024. I was certainly proud. The head honcho was a little bit more reticent, and Pink People was not at all enamoured by the idea, but that's more to do with our personalities. No one could ever accuse me of being a wallflower, but both the head honcho and Pink People are far more shy and retiring. They'd much rather be nattering to a small group of litter pickers than be faced with an entire room of people. Plus, there's that little point that I get over-enthusiastic and micromanage when I plan an event. Everything is planned down to the smallest detail. And bless them, they put up with me so well. The last thing I'm going to mention in this journey through our timeline is the last series we created. It was years in the making. Well, insofar as when the head honcho and I drove down the old road to Crynant years ago, bagging the caches that Cowerherp had placed, we vowed that if the caches were ever archived, we'd nab the spaces. The entire long, narrow, quiet road. Just the sort of lane that no one except the head honcho and Pink People seemed to enjoy driving along. And when it finally happened, we were ready. And we threw everything we had at it. Our entire 10 years of accumulated caching knowledge. We spent hours upon hours creating a cohesive 18-part series based on Tolkien's Middle-earth. On the digital side of things, we sourced quotes and the correct Elven fonts. I printed off log sheets, and we generally bandied ideas about. And here are the 18 caches. 1. Lord of the Nazgul, printed by the head honcho. 2. I See Hobbitses. 3. The Watcher in the Water. The tentacle colour matches the floating device. 4. Treebeard. I fell over here. We don't talk about it. 5. Sam's Box. Unusual themed swag. 6. Orcs. An awful lot of mints were consumed for this to be possible. 7. The Eye of Sauron. I am not a good artist, but I think this looks horrible enough to encapsulate the eye. 8. Shelob's Lair, a head honcho construction. 9. Gimli, all hand-painted. 10. The One Ring. No one can ever find it. 11. Gollum. You do your best. Sometimes things still fall apart. 12. Boromir's Horn. I broke a couple of paintbrushes painting this. 13. Smaug's Lair. The head honcho whacked a lot of glue in place to make this. 14. Mithril Chainmail. Apparently, we can't 3D print chainmail. There were so many tries. This was our compromise. 15. Turgon's Staff. The things we have just laying around for years. 16. Gandalf the White. They're not quite so white any longer. 17. The Fellowship. Box, light, coordinates, sorted. 18. Map of Middle-earth. I admit it, I reused an idea again. This was from the 2024 Tembe map puzzle. And there you have it, 10 years of the Cachekeepers. The Middle-earth series nearly did us in, and we very nearly gave up on it. But so far, nearly 40 sets of caches have completed the series, and we have accumulated 182 favourite points on it. And we're all very happy with that. And that's why we do this strange hobby that we call geocaching, especially the geosetting, the cache-keeping parts of things, to make people happy, to give back the joy that we feel when we find a cache. It isn't for everyone, but it is for us. Maybe not for another 10 years, but for now.